My name is Eric Muller, and I was one of the fortunate or perhaps cursed souls to serve aboard the LZ-129 Hindenburg during what was to be its final voyage across the Atlantic. As I pen these words, the memories of those days are as vivid as the stark terror that accompanied them, shadows that have clung to me far more persistently than smoke clings to clothing after a fire. I joined the Hindenburg's crew in the spring of 1937, drawn by the allure of the skies and the promise of traversing the globe in what was then the pinnacle of human engineering. The Hindenburg was more than just an airship, it was a floating palace that symbolized the might of the new Germany, a behemoth of fabric and gas that dwarfed every building in our town. The morning of our departure was unusually brisk, a chill that seemed at odds with the excitement that bubbled through the crew quarters. We were set to embark from Frankfurt, Germany, to Lakehurst, New Jersey. Passengers, a mix of affluent aristocrats, esteemed academics, and families, were abuzz with the thrill of the journey ahead. Little did any of us know, it was a journey destined to be etched in the annals of history for its catastrophic conclusion. As we prepared for takeoff, I remember looking up at the massive structure that towered over us. The Hindenburg loomed like a giant against the dawn sky, its silver skin gleaming under the caress of the early morning sun. There was a palpable sense of pride among the crew, we were part of something monumental, a testament to what mankind could achieve. Yet, beneath the veneer of excitement, a strange unease gnawed at me. It was a fleeting shadow, one that I dismissed as quickly as it came. After all, what did I know of omens? I was a mechanic, not a mystic. Little did I understand, that shadow was a harbinger, a subtle whisper of the horror that was to come. In hindsight, every detail of that morning seems a piece of a larger puzzle I was yet too blind to see. The way the wind whispered a bit too mournfully, the slight tension in the captain's smile, the nervous tapping of a passenger's fingers against her suitcase, all mundane moments, all part of a normal day, yet all tinged with an invisible foreboding. As the engines roared to life and the ground slowly fell away, we ascended into the clouds, unaware that for many aboard, the earth would never again feel solid under their feet. The journey ahead was one of promise and wonder, but it was also a journey towards an inevitable descent into disaster. A descent that would end an era of passenger airship travel and begin my long struggle with the visions that haunt me to this day. Thus begins the tale of the Hindenburg, a tale of human triumph and tragedy, of secrets hidden within the heart of the Inferno, a tale that I am compelled to tell before time erases the truths that must be known. As the morning sun cast its golden hues over Frankfurt, the air around the Hindenburg was charged with a tangible excitement. People gathered in awe, their eyes wide with admiration and wonder, as the ground crew made final preparations. The airship, a colossal marvel of technology, stood ready, its hull gleaming and imposing against the clear blue sky. I watched, heart swelling with pride, as families waved their farewells and enthusiasts snapped photographs, capturing a moment that was as historic as it was breathtaking. The engines began their low, resonant hum, a sound that seemed to harmonize with the collective heartbeat of everyone present. Then, with a grace that belied its immense size, the Hindenburg lifted. The ropes that tethered it to the earth fell slack, and we ascended, slowly at first, then with steady purpose. Below us, the landscape transformed. Fields and forests became a patchwork quilt of greens and browns, rivers winding through them like silver threads. Inside the gondola, passengers pressed against the windows, their faces lit with joy and awe. Children's laughter mingled with a murmur of conversations, tales of where they'd been, and dreams of where they were going. Every upward meter we climbed seemed to elevate the spirits of those on board, as the airship itself became a floating bubble of euphoria, rising not just through the atmosphere, but above the very concept of human limitation. From my position near the controls, I could feel the ship's powerful engines thrumming through the floor, a constant reminder of the force propelling us forward. Yet, despite the mechanical might at our command, there was a serenity to our ascent, a peaceful defiance of gravity that made the world seem both vast and conquerable. As we reached our cruising altitude, the horizon stretched infinitely in all directions, a reminder of both the adventure that lay ahead and the insignificance of our troubles when viewed from such heights. The Hindenburg, a symbol of human ambition and ingenuity, sailed through the sky, not just a vehicle of transport, but a testament to the dreams of all who had dared to look up and yearn for the stars. As the Hindenburg soared higher, the airship buzzed with the energy of its diverse inhabitants. Among the crew, Karl Heinz stood out as the chief navigator, a man of precision and unwavering focus. His eyes, always scanning charts and maps, missed little, making him a revered and somewhat feared figure among the younger crew members. In the dining area, I encountered Anna Richter, our chief stewardess, orchestrating the service with a grace that made the challenging task look effortless. Her ability to calm nervous passengers with just a few words was a skill as vital as any technical expertise on board. Among the passengers, Professor Ludwig Weber, a distinguished historian, engaged anyone who would listen in deep discussions about the implications of air travel on cultural exchanges. His young assistant, Elise Hoffman, diligently took notes, her curiosity occasionally interrupting her duties with questions that sparked lively debates. A wealthy industrialist, Herr Friedrich Bauer, traveled with his family. His wife, Marguerite, was a keen observer of the airship's engineering, often engaging crew members in detailed conversations that revealed her own background in mechanical studies. The dynamics between the crew and passengers were a delicate dance of professionalism and camaraderie. Karl often shared navigational wonders with intrigued passengers, bridging the gap between operation and experience. Meanwhile, Anna navigated her responsibilities with a warmth that belied the strict hierarchy typically maintained on such voyages. A particularly intriguing figure was Thomas Muller, a quiet journalist with a sharp eye and a notebook always at hand, capturing stories and snippets of conversations. His presence was a constant reminder that the events aboard the Hindenburg were of public interest, adding a layer of importance to every interaction. This eclectic mix of individuals, each with their unique backgrounds and reasons for being aboard the Hindenburg, created a microcosm of society at the time. As the journey progressed, their stories and interactions wove a tapestry as complex and compelling as the journey itself, adding depth and color to the fabric of our shared experience in the skies. As the Hindenburg gracefully navigated the skies, the atmosphere aboard was one of jubilation and marvel. Yet, amidst the clinking of dining ware and the hum of excited conversations, an unsettling sensation began to gnaw at me. It was during a routine check of the engine room, a part of the ship I knew like the back of my hand, that I first felt an inexplicable chill that seemed to seep through the steel walls, momentarily chilling the air around me, despite the warmth generated by the engines. Initially, I chalked it up to a draft, perhaps a minor issue with the airship's ventilation system. But as I continued my inspections, the feeling of unease persisted, an unshakable sense that something was amiss. It was a whisper of intuition, faint yet insistent, suggesting that not all was as it should be. In an attempt to dismiss these unsettling thoughts, I focused more intently on my duties, tightening a bolt here, checking a gauge there, telling myself that it was nothing more than the jitters of a long journey ahead. I reminded myself of the countless hours of maintenance and checks the Hindenburg had undergone before takeoff. It's just the novelty of the journey, the responsibility, I muttered under my breath, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. Despite my efforts, the feeling lingered like a faint shadow at the edge of my vision, easy to ignore, but impossible to erase. I forced a laugh, shaking my head at my own foolishness. Too much coffee this morning, Eric, I joked to a nearby colleague, who offered a sympathetic chuckle in return. However, as I walked away, the weight of the unease settled deeper, a premonition I couldn't quite shake off. It was a disquiet that would soon prove to be more than just a fleeting worry. Life aboard the Hindenburg unfolded with a rhythm as precise as the mechanics of the airship itself. Each morning began with the soft murmur of the crew as they commenced their daily routines: inspections, maintenance checks, and consultations about the day's weather and navigation plans. The gentle hum of the engines provided a constant backdrop to the activities, a reminder of the complex ballet of technology that kept us aloft. The passengers, enveloped in the luxury of the airship's facilities, enjoyed a schedule filled with leisure. Breakfast was served in the dining area, where tables were set with crisp linens and fine china, the food as sumptuous as that of any grand hotel. Following the morning meal, many guests would retire to the observation deck. Here, wrapped in blankets against the chill of the high altitude, they gazed out at the passing clouds, which painted ever-changing scenes against the vast open sky. Afternoons were for socializing. The lounge became a hub of activity. Card games were laid out, books passed around, and conversations ebbed and flowed with the ease of people free from the usual constraints of time and place. Children, few but ever present, darted between groups, their laughter ringing out, a light counterpoint to the more subdued tones of adult discourse. Crew interactions with the passengers were governed by an unspoken code of conduct. While we maintained a professional distance, there was a mutual respect that bridged the gap between service and camaraderie. We shared stories of past flights, explained the workings of the airship to curious minds, and occasionally joined in the lighter, more playful activities. As evening approached, the tone shifted. Dinner was an affair marked by a softening of the day's formality. The clink of silverware and the murmur of satisfied diners blended with the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. Post-dinner, some passengers lingered over coffee and spirits, discussing the day's sights or plans for their imminent arrival, while others retired early, lulled by the gentle sway of the airship. Throughout these daily interactions, a sense of community developed in ephemeral township suspended in the sky. Despite the undercurrent of my unease, this communal spirit fostered a semblance of normalcy, making each day aboard the Hindenburg a unique blend of routine and wonder, a floating slice of humanity gracefully navigating the vast open skies. Amid the predictable rhythms of daily life aboard the Hindenburg, peculiar disruptions began to weave their way into my experience, casting a shadow over the otherwise orderly existence. These disruptions were subtle at first, almost dismissible as the mind playing tricks, but they accumulated a weight of suspicion that was hard to ignore. One morning, I noticed that the toolbox in the engine room was not in its usual spot. At first, I thought little of it, attributing the anomaly to a colleague's oversight. However, when tools started appearing in unlikely places, wrenches nestled between dinner plates in the galley, screwdrivers tucked under cushions in the lounge, it became apparent that this was no mere forgetfulness. Another day, as I reviewed the passenger log, I found entries that seemed to rewrite themselves. Names I did not recall seeing before would appear, and others would vanish, as if the very fabric of reality aboard the ship was fraying at the edges. These shifts were slight, easily overlooked in the grand scheme of things, but to me, they were glaring. Eerie coincidences also began to punctuate my days. I would think of a particular song only to hear it moments later hummed by someone passing in the hallway. I chalked these occurrences up to the strange acoustics of the airship or perhaps the close quarters, leading to shared thoughts among the crew and passengers. Even more unsettling was a conversation I overheard two passengers discussing a dream one had about a storm, describing it with vivid, alarming detail. That very evening, a storm did indeed gather, its lightning illuminating the skies around us with an electric fury that mirrored the passengers' description almost exactly. These oddities, while minor individually, stitched together a tapestry of doubt and wariness in my mind. They were whispers of something amiss, a puzzle whose pieces did not quite fit, urging me to look closer, to question the reality I had taken for granted amidst the clouds. As days melded into nights aboard the Hindenburg, the string of unsettling incidents continued to grow, each one adding to a mounting sense of dread that settled over me like a dense fog. The airship, once a symbol of majestic human achievement, now seemed to whisper secrets in every creak of its frame and hiss of its valves. My interactions with others became tinged with a cautious scrutiny. I found myself watching faces a little longer, listening more intently to conversations, searching for signs or acknowledgements of the oddities I was experiencing. However, it appeared I was alone in my suspicions, or perhaps others were simply better at concealing their concerns. This isolation only deepened my unease. At meals, I would catch snippets of conversation that seemed perfectly normal, yet felt strangely scripted. Laughter rang out at jokes, but sometimes it struck a hollow note, as if echoing from somewhere far more distant than the walls of the dining hall. At night, the hum of the engines, once a comforting lullaby that spoke of progress and human ingenuity, now sounded like a murmured warning. The gentle vibrations of the airship's travel, which had lulled others to sleep, kept me awake, eyes wide in the dark, ears straining for any sound out of place. The persistence of these anomalies led me to start a discreet log, documenting every odd occurrence, no matter how small. The act of recording them gave a concrete form to my fears, making them both more real and more terrifying. With each entry, the pages of my journal filled not just with ink, but with a growing certainty that these were not mere coincidences. Each subtle discrepancy, each misplaced item, and each eerie coincidence felt like pieces of a puzzle being laid before me, urging me to see the larger picture. Yet the more I observed and noted, the more elusive any clear understanding became. It was as if the airship itself held a consciousness, aware of my probing, and was cloaking its secrets in ever thicker veils of mystery. This buildup of suspicion was not just about the fear of a tangible threat, it was a deeper, more existential dread. It gnawed at the very edges of my reasoning, challenging my understanding of reality aboard this floating enclave. I began to feel as though we were not merely passengers on an airship, but actors in a plot whose script was written in shadows, and I was inadvertently stepping off the page. One late afternoon, as the Hindenburg sailed quietly through a cloud-dappled sky, my routine inspection took a chilling turn. In the lower cargo hold, a section seldom frequented during flight due to its cramped conditions and dim lighting, I stumbled upon something that halted me in my tracks. Tucked away behind a stack of luggage, obscured from casual view, was a small, leather-bound notebook. Its placement was deliberate, hidden yet accessible to someone who knew where to look. Curiosity overcame caution, and I flipped it open, only to find pages filled with cryptic notes and diagrams that were unlike any standard navigational or operational logs the crew maintained. The contents were a mix of technical schematics that didn't correspond with any part of the Hindenburg I was familiar with, and amidst these drawings were annotations written in a hurried, almost frantic scrawl. Phrases like "ensure it remains hidden" and "alterations must be undetectable" jumped out, sending a cold shiver down my spine. The discovery of this notebook suggested deliberate tampering with the airship, potentially jeopardizing everyone on board. As I delved deeper into the notebook, one diagram particularly stood out. It depicted an unrecognizable component connected to the airship's hydrogen cells. The implications were dire. It hinted at a deliberate modification unknown to the crew or the company. This anomaly could represent a catastrophic risk during flight, especially concerning the highly flammable hydrogen that kept us aloft. My mind raced with the implications of this find. Someone on board, possibly even someone I interacted with daily, was involved in this surreptitious endeavor. The trust and camaraderie that had bound us together as a crew now seemed naively misplaced. After documenting the exact location and appearance of the notebook, I carefully replaced it exactly as I had found it. It was crucial to maintain the status quo until I could determine the best course of action. With the notebook once again concealed, I left the cargo hold, a heavy burden of knowledge weighing on my shoulders, my mind teeming with more questions than before about the true nature of our voyage across the Atlantic. The discovery of the hidden notebook compelled me to subtly probe my fellow crew members, seeking their insights and perhaps inadvertently drawing out their suspicions or knowledge regarding the Hindenburg safety. These conversations had to be approached with care to avoid revealing my own anxieties or the specifics of what I had found. One evening, under the guise of a casual chat during our dinner break, I broached the topic with Klaus, one of the senior engineers. Over plates of schnitzel and potatoes, I mentioned hearing odd noises during my rounds, framing it as a curiosity rather than an alarm. Klaus, fork midway to his mouth, paused and gave me a measured look. "Eric, this ship is the pride of Germany, engineered to perfection. But Eric, we must do our duties. Fear can't pilot this ship," she whispered back, a note of caution lacing her usual stern demeanor. In a more confrontational exchange, I cornered Dieter, a mechanic who often bragged about his knowledge of the airship's inner workings. "Dieter, suppose someone found something off in the workings. Hypothetically, what would you do?" His reaction was swift and a bit defensive. "Look, every bolt and panel on this beast is accounted for. Don't let your imagination get the better of you. We're in the safest hands." His dismissive scoff was punctuated by a quick, nervous glance over his shoulder, as if worried about being overheard. Each conversation left me with a mosaic of perspectives. Klaus's staunch denial mingled with professional pride, Helga's subtle admissions of unease, and Dieter's aggressive dismissal. The discordance in their responses painted a picture of a crew not entirely unified in their confidence about the ship's safety, each member perhaps struggling with their private apprehensions, while outwardly upholding the facade of invulnerability that the Hindenburg was expected to represent. As the voyage continued, my solitary investigations into the anomalies aboard the Hindenburg deepened my sense of isolation from my fellow crew members and passengers. With each surreptitious search and each covert examination of the ship's mechanisms, the weight of secrecy grew heavier. I moved through my duties with a heightened awareness, constantly vigilant, interpreting every creak of the airship's structure and every sidelong glance from a crew member as potential signs of the looming danger I felt certain was there. This growing paranoia infused my interactions with a silent tension. Conversations became minefields. I was always on guard, careful not to reveal too much, parsing every word for hidden meanings or inadvertent disclosures. I started to avoid communal gatherings, choosing instead to spend my free time poring over the cryptic notebook and my own accumulating notes, trying to piece together the puzzle without alerting anyone to my fears. Nighttime was the worst. Alone in my bunk, the darkness seemed imbued with whispers of impending disaster. The soft hum of the airship, once a comforting sound of our progress, now felt like a mocking prelude to catastrophe. I lay awake, ears straining for the slightest anomaly in the rhythm of the engines, heart pounding at each shift of the wind outside. My days were consumed by a relentless drive to find more evidence, to validate the creeping dread that kept tightening its grip on my psyche. I scrutinized every corner of the Hindenburg, every face, every piece of equipment, searching for anything that might confirm the sabotage I suspected. Yet, the more I searched, the more isolated I felt, trapped in a web of my own making, unable to share my fears for fear of not being believed or, worse, being implicated in some unforeseen way. This isolation wasn't just physical but emotional. I felt a chasm growing between myself and those around me, a chasm filled with the shadows of mistrust and fear. It was a loneliness that went beyond mere solitude, a state of being severed from normal human relationships by the burden of knowledge and the fear of what might come if I failed to act in time. Driven by the disjointed clues and ominous insinuations of the hidden notebook, I began to formulate a theory that seemed as unbelievable as it was terrifying. A conspiracy of sabotage rooted deeply in political and personal vendettas. This theory postulated that someone, or some group, had altered the Hindenburg's mechanisms not out of malice towards the passengers specifically, but as a larger statement against the entities the airship represented. The notebook's cryptic entries hinted at deep-seated grievances. Phrases like "they'll see the truth come to light" and "a flame to purge the lies." In a quiet corner of the engine room, away from the ears of other crew members, I laid out the altered logs, the photos of tampered machinery, and the cryptic entries from the notebook. The engineer's initial skepticism turned to concern as the implications of the sabotage became undeniable. His decision to stand with me was pivotal, lending me the additional authority and access I needed to address the sabotage head-on. Together, we implemented a plan to reverse the dangerous modifications that had been stealthily enacted. This required discreetly accessing critical systems while avoiding detection by those involved in the plot. It was a delicate operation, performed under the guise of routine checks to ensure that the conspirators remained unaware of our knowledge and actions. Simultaneously, I took the additional step of preparing a detailed report to be delivered to the American authorities upon landing. This document meticulously outlined the conspiracy, the evidence, and the actions taken to prevent the disaster, ensuring that even if something went wrong during our intervention, the truth would not perish with the Hindenburg. As the New Jersey coast approached, each action we took was fraught with tension, but driven by a clear imperative to safeguard the ship and all souls aboard. This decisive intervention, conducted amidst a looming threat of discovery and disaster, marked a turning point not only in the voyage of the Hindenburg but in my own life, as I transitioned from a mere mechanic to a guardian of lives. Despite our fervent efforts to neutralize the threat, the shadow of catastrophe loomed large as the Hindenburg made its final approach to Lakehurst, New Jersey. The air was tense with anticipation, the crew and passengers unaware of the silent battle that had been waged in the heart of the airship. As we began the delicate process of docking, a palpable unease permeated through the gondola. Every hand was steady, every eye watchful. The docking procedure started under a dusky sky, the setting sun casting long shadows that seemed to foretell the impending doom. Our hearts raced as we monitored every aspect of the Hindenburg's descent, hopeful that our interventions had been enough to avert disaster. But fate, it seemed, had already woven its tragic thread. In a horrific instant, the air was shattered by a deafening roar. Fire erupted from the tail of the airship, a furious inferno that consumed the Hindenburg with terrifying speed. The flames, fueled by the hydrogen that buoyed us, created a hellish tableau against the evening sky, a vivid reminder of the fragile line between human ingenuity and hubris. The structure of the airship, once a symbol of technological marvel, became an agonizing pyre. The fabric and framework succumbed rapidly to the blaze, falling to the earth in a tragic cascade. From my vantage point on the ground, having barely managed to escape, I watched in horror as what was meant to be a routine docking turned into a disaster of unimaginable proportions. The explosion sent shockwaves through the airfield, and the screams of the onlookers mingled with the cries of the trapped and the injured. Emergency crews rushed towards the Inferno, a desperate rescue effort unfolding amid the chaos. The scene was one of utter devastation, a stark contrast to the hopeful journey that had begun days earlier across the Atlantic. In those harrowing moments, as I stood amidst the wreckage and the ruin, the weight of our failure to completely prevent the disaster was crushing. The Hindenburg, when the explosion erupted, it was a monstrous roar that seemed to consume the air itself. Flames surged through the corridors, a rapid inferno that devoured everything in its path. Heat seared my face, and smoke filled my lungs, the acrid stench of burning hydrogen clawing at my throat. I coughed violently, struggling to draw breath as the structure around me buckled and twisted in the fire's embrace. Navigating through the Hindenburg during these critical moments was a nightmarish ordeal. My vision blurred by tears and smoke, I stumbled through the once familiar passageways now transformed into a labyrinth of fire. Each step was a gamble against time and flame, my uniform singed as embers flew like demonic fireflies in the darkened spaces. The screams of trapped passengers and crew pierced the roar of the fire, each cry a stark reminder of the stakes at play. I moved with desperate urgency, guided by a dwindling hope of escape. The heat was oppressive, bearing down like a physical weight, making each breath a battle against suffocation. Finally, I reached a gaping hole where the side of the airship had ruptured. Without a moment's hesitation, I leapt through, a desperate dive into the uncertain. I hit the ground hard, rolling to extinguish flames that had caught on my clothing. Lying there, on the cold, hard earth, I gasped for breath, each inhale a sharp stab of pain in my smoke-ravaged lungs. Looking back at the burning wreckage, the scale of the catastrophe was overwhelming. The Hindenburg, once a majestic vessel soaring through the skies, was now just a skeletal frame of fire and smoke. My survival felt miraculous, a sliver of fortune in an otherwise dark tapestry of fate. The scars I bore from those final moments, burns that marked my flesh, aches that would linger in my bones, were stark reminders of the thin line between life and death I had walked that evening. In the immediate aftermath of the Hindenburg's catastrophic explosion, the scene at the airfield was one of frenzied chaos and desperate urgency. Emergency vehicles, their sirens wailing mournfully, converged on the smoldering wreckage from all directions, cutting through the gathering dusk with their flashing lights. Firefighters, clad in heavy gear, directed powerful streams of water and foam towards the flames, which stubbornly licked the sky with ferocious intensity. Medical personnel, accompanied by stretchers and medical kits, maneuvered through the debris and confusion, tending to the injured with swift professionalism. Their faces were grim, yet their hands moved with practiced efficiency, providing first aid, applying bandages, and administering pain relief. The cries of the wounded filled the air, a haunting symphony of pain and shock, as survivors were carefully extracted from the twisted metal and hurried to makeshift triage centers. Volunteers and off-duty personnel joined the effort, helping to clear debris or provide comfort to those in shock. Blankets were draped over survivors' shoulders, and soothing words were offered, little comforts in the face of overwhelming disaster. Amidst the turmoil, I found myself aiding where I could, my own injuries momentarily forgotten in the face of others' needs. My hands, guided by adrenaline, removed debris and helped stabilize the injured for transport. The acrid smell of charred metal and burned fabric hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of medical antiseptics and the earthy aroma of dampened ashes. As night fully settled, the full scope of the disaster became clearer. The once mighty Hindenburg lay in ruins, its framework distorted and blackened, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. The ground was littered with belongings scattered in the rush to escape. Suitcases burst open, their contents strewn about, personal items trampled underfoot. The coordinated chaos of the rescue operations continued well into the night, each participant, whether rescuer or survivor, bound together by the shared urgency of the moment. The airfield, typically a place of arrivals and departures, had transformed into a ground zero of rescue and recovery, where every second counted and every action was a potential lifeline. In the sterile tranquility of the hospital, far removed from the fiery chaos of the Hindenburg disaster, I lay in a stark white room, the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment providing a constant, if not comforting, soundtrack. Bandaged and bruised, my body was a map of the ordeal I had endured, each wound a testament to the harrowing escape from the burning airship. As the initial adrenaline faded, the gravity of the catastrophe began to truly sink in. Lying there, surrounded by the antiseptic smell that permeated the hospital, I was haunted by vivid flashbacks. The roar of the flames and the screams of panic replayed in my mind with merciless clarity, each memory punctuated by the heart-wrenching sights of pain and loss. The quiet of the hospital room, meant to be a sanctuary, instead felt oppressively silent, amplifying the internal noise of my thoughts. Nurses came and went, their voices a muted blur, as I stared fixedly at the ceiling, grappling with an overwhelming sense of guilt. Why had I survived when so many had not? Could I have done more to prevent the tragedy? Nighttime was the hardest, as the darkness seemed to bring the memories into sharper focus. The images of desperate faces and the Inferno consuming the Hindenburg played on a loop in my mind. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and disturbed by nightmares where I relived the disaster, each time finding new details to agonize over. The loss of colleagues and passengers, many of whom I had come to know during the journey, weighed heavily on my heart. Each life lost was a story ended prematurely, a personal universe extinguished. I found myself mourning not only for them, but for the era of airship travel that ended so dramatically with the Hindenburg's descent. As days passed, doctors spoke optimistically about my physical recovery, but the psychological scars ran deeper. I knew that the road to mental and emotional recovery would be much longer and fraught with challenges. The hospital, with its corridors of recovery and rooms of respite, became a temporary refuge where I began the slow and painful process of healing, not just from physical injuries, but from the profound loss and haunting memories that the disaster had imprinted on my psyche. As I convalesced in the hospital, the interest from investigators and the press intensified. The Hindenburg disaster had captured the world's attention, and every detail, every survivor's testimony was under scrutiny. Dealing with this influx of inquiries required a careful balance of transparency and discretion. Investigators, both from aviation safety boards and insurance companies, were thorough in their questioning. They probed into the minutiae of the flight, seeking inconsistencies or overlooked malfunctions that could explain the disaster. Each session was a dance of words. I provided them with factual accounts of the journey, carefully omitting any mention of the conspiracy theories I had pieced together. Revealing my suspicions without concrete evidence could expose me to undue scrutiny and potentially endanger my safety, given the shadowy implications of sabotage. The press was even more voracious for information. Journalists camped out in the hospital lobby, eager for any tidbit that might make a headline. Interviews were a constant barrage of probing questions about the explosion. "What did you see? What do you think happened?" they would ask. I kept my responses measured and vague, focusing on the chaos and my immediate reactions, rather than my deeper investigations. In these interactions, I maintained a facade of the shocked survivor, concealing the depth of my knowledge. The fear that the true nature of my discoveries might attract dangerous attention was ever present. I was acutely aware that any slip-up could not only compromise my investigation, but also pull me into a vortex of conspiracy theories and media sensationalism. This dual pressure from investigators and the media was mentally exhausting. Each question posed a risk of revealing too much, and I had to navigate these conversations with extreme caution. Maintaining this secrecy wasn't just a matter of personal safety, it was also about preserving the integrity of the ongoing investigation into the disaster, which I hoped would eventually uncover the truth in a way that would bring justice for those lost. In the wake of the Hindenburg disaster, the psychological impact on me was profound and disorienting. As the days turned into weeks, the line between reality and the dark recesses of my mind began to blur, leading to a disturbing series of visions that haunted both my waking hours and my dreams. These visions were vivid reenactments of the explosion, replayed with painful precision. I would see the flames engulfing the airship, hear the desperate cries of passengers and crew, feel the intense heat on my skin, all with such clarity that it felt as though the disaster was occurring anew. Sometimes, these hallucinations would occur in broad daylight, superimposed over mundane hospital settings, making it challenging to distinguish where the memory of the catastrophe ended and the present began. The recurring images were not just limited to the disaster itself. They evolved into intrusive thoughts of what could have been done differently, each scenario playing out with torturous detail in my mind's eye. This mental cinema featured alternate endings crafted by paranoia-hidden bombs, mysterious saboteurs lurking in shadows. Each therapy sessions became a critical part of my recovery, places where I could voice these visions without fear of judgment or disbelief. My therapist worked to help me understand that these were manifestations of PTSD, a brain struggling to process trauma by cycling through its memories, attempting to resolve an irresolvable horror. The journey to reclaim my mental health was arduous, marked by small victories and significant setbacks. Gradually, with professional help and the support of loved ones, I learned coping strategies to manage the visions, to ground myself in reality when my mind wandered into the depths of what had happened. This process was not just about healing from physical injuries, but about mending the deep mental scars left by the Hindenburg disaster, a pivotal step towards finding peace amidst the memories that once threatened to consume me. After the Hindenburg disaster, my life unfolded under the shadow of what I had experienced and the secrets I carried. The burden of knowing the potential reasons behind the tragedy, coupled with the haunting memories of the event, molded my existence into a series of relentless challenges and personal quests for meaning and justice. I found myself in a world that had moved on from the disaster, yet I remained tethered to that fateful day. My career path shifted toward safety advocacy in aviation, driven by an unyielding desire to prevent such tragedies from recurring. This professional pursuit, however, was more than just a job. It was a personal crusade, fueled by the memories of flames and screams, to ensure that the lessons of the Hindenburg were not forgotten. Social interactions became complex, as I wrestled internally with how much to reveal about my suspicions and insights. Friendships and relationships were strained by my often distant demeanor and the sudden, intense discussions about safety and conspiracy that I could not always suppress. The need to share my burden wrestled with the imperative to protect those around me from the darker aspects of my knowledge. In quieter moments, my mind would often drift back to the investigation, to the clues and evidence I had gathered. I would find myself reviewing old documents and photos, searching for something missed, a piece of the puzzle that might finally bring peace to my restless thoughts. This relentless analysis was both a curse and a compulsion, a loop of scrutiny that rarely yielded new insights, but was impossible to abandon. Volunteer work with disaster recovery organizations also became a significant part of my life. By helping others affected by similar catastrophic events, I sought some form of redemption and a practical way to channel my tumultuous emotions into actions that could bring relief to others. Each act of assistance was a step towards healing, an attempt to mend others' lives, even as I struggled to piece together my own. Thus, my life post-Hindenburg was a tapestry of advocacy, introspection, and community service, each thread woven with the dark colors of past trauma, but also the brighter hues of hope and resilience. My journey was one of continuous struggle with the knowledge I possessed, a journey punctuated by moments of profound sadness, but also significant purpose. In the years following the Hindenburg disaster, my life took on an air of the enigmatic, punctuated by sporadic encounters with individuals whose presence and words suggested a deeper narrative connected to the tragic event. These mysterious figures surfaced unpredictably, often when the memories of the disaster began to feel more distant. One such encounter occurred on a damp, foggy evening in New York City. While walking through the misty streets near Battery Park, a figure detached itself from the shadows and fell into step beside me. The man, cloaked in a nondescript trench coat, spoke in hushed tones, his voice barely rising above the murmur of the city. "You know, not all was as it seemed with the LZ-129, he said, casting a glance that seemed to pierce through the fog. Before I could demand more clarity, he slipped away, swallowed by the fog, leaving behind a chilling implication of hidden truths. Months later, at a conference on aviation safety in Chicago, a woman approached me during a coffee break. Her eyes were sharp, her manner assertive. "I've read your submissions," she began, referencing the papers I had presented. "Consider the broader geopolitical context of your findings," she suggested cryptically, before disappearing into the crowd, her words hanging in the air like a puzzle left for me to solve. Another incident took place in a small bookstore in Berlin, where I was browsing old military histories. A note was slipped into my hand by an elderly gentleman with a solemn expression. "Look deeper into the passenger list," it read, "connections are deeper than you think." The man left without another word, leaving me staring after him, the note burning in my hand like a torch. These encounters, though brief and shrouded in ambiguity, fueled a growing suspicion that the disaster might have been entangled in a web of larger, more ominous geopolitical maneuvers. Each mysterious figure seemed to be nudging me towards a truth that was just out of reach, hinting at layers of intrigue that extended far beyond a simple accident. Haunted by these encounters, I delved deeper into historical and political research, trying to connect the cryptic hints to real events and figures. This journey was isolating, filled with dead ends and shadows that seemed to watch from just beyond the light. Yet, these brushes with the unknown only strengthened my resolve to unearth the full story behind the Hindenburg, a story that seemed to stretch far beyond the confines of the airship itself. As the years passed and the memories of the Hindenburg disaster remained vivid in my mind, my resolve to combat the unseen forces behind such tragedies only intensified. The enigmatic encounters with individuals hinting at deeper, darker undercurrents related to the disaster had solidified a persistent fear in me. That without vigilance and action, history was doomed to repeat itself. Driven by this fear, I dedicated myself more fervently to uncovering and understanding the complex network of influences that may have contributed to the Hindenburg's fate. I immersed myself in research, combing through archives and re-examining old evidence with a new perspective, always searching for threads that might connect the disaster to larger, more sinister plots. My efforts extended beyond mere research. I became an outspoken advocate for transparency and stringent safety regulations in the aviation industry. At conferences, in public forums, and through publications, I urged a proactive approach to safety, one that not only addressed mechanical and technical adequacies, but also considered the possible interferences of sabotage and political manipulation. Each piece of new information, each small revelation, reinforced my commitment. I engaged with experts in aviation, history, and security, building a coalition of like-minded individuals who shared my concerns about the hidden dangers lurking within seemingly unrelated events. Together, we pushed for changes, advocating for more thorough investigations and oversight into not just how accidents happened, but why. The battle often felt Sisyphean, with every step forward met with obstacles, skepticism from peers, dismissal by authorities, or the daunting nature of the task itself. Yet, the potential cost of inaction, the possibility of another disaster born from shadows, fueled my determination. I knew that the fight against these unseen forces might never fully be won, but the act of fighting, of refusing to let the lessons of the Hindenburg fade into obscurity, was a victory in itself. This was not just a personal crusade, it was a necessary stance to protect future generations from the calamities that arise when hidden agendas are allowed to influence the course of human endeavors. My resolve was clear. To remain vigilant and persistent, no matter the odds, to ensure that the skies remained safe for all who traveled through them. Years have passed since the Hindenburg disaster, a tragic event that marked the end of an era in aviation history and began my lifelong journey into the depths of human folly and resilience. As I pen these final words, I do so with a profound awareness that some questions may never find their answers, and some truths may remain shrouded in the mists of secrecy and time. The investigation into the Hindenburg's demise did eventually conclude, attributing the catastrophe to a combination of mechanical failure and human error, a conclusion that was both satisfying and frustrating. Satisfying because it offered closure to the public, and frustrating because those of us touched directly by the event knew there were layers that went unexamined, depths not plumbed. My role in the aftermath, both as a survivor and as an investigator, has taught me invaluable lessons about the complexity of truth. The mysteries I encountered, the hints of larger schemes, and the spectral figures that crossed my path transformed my view of the world. They instilled in me a vigilance and a commitment to seeking out the hidden forces at play behind the facades of normalcy. This document, this account of my experiences, is my legacy. It is a testament to the belief that understanding the past is essential to navigating the future. I leave it behind not just as a record of what happened, but as a beacon for those who, in their own times of crisis and confusion, seek to uncover the truth buried under layers of obfuscation and fear. As for me, the years have taken their toll. I have grown old, but my resolve has not waned. The shadows of the Hindenburg follow me still, a reminder of both human capability and catastrophe. My hope is that this account will serve as both a warning and an inspiration. A warning of the perils of ignorance and